Cyclists and triathletes and their coaches around the world are echoing the rallying cry of lift heavy stuff, get into the weight room and deadlift heavy. But in fact, there are a couple of different things that you need to be careful of as cyclists and triathletes and endurance athletes that have to do with your spine, your hips, and the tissues involved. And we're going to talk about the top 3 here today. While eventually we will need to lift heavy stuff, we have to go through a few stages before we get there. In fact, that stage will come usually when most cyclists and triathletes are cutting their strength training out or cutting it down to core, whatever that may be.
Don't you say that. Don't you ever say that. Stay here. Stay as long as you can.
Now, the challenge with this is that you're going to lose the very tissue adaptations and lose these skills that we are about to talk about that are so absolutely important, not just for you to be able to strength train safely, but are also some of the number 1 reasons why many cyclists and triathletes hit the weights, and that is to increase bone density and to decrease the likelihood of injury. So let's get right into those 3 things that we were mentioning. Number 1 is going to be learning the ability to move about the hip. Now, I have a couple of different exercises here on the HVTraining channel, including the hip CAR, which is essentially just learning how to move through the hip, as well as the unsupported hip airplane. These 2 exercises are glaring examples of how poor many cyclists and triathletes move through their hips. Instead, they move through their lower back, which we'll talk about in just a second, or they move through their knee and foot, as opposed to getting the full range of motion from the hip. Now, if we're talking about the darling of strength training for cyclists and triathletes these days, the deadlift, I have made it very clear in no unsure terms that you should not be deadlifting off the floor. And I chuckle there because it's hard to get that message across, because a hinge is a hinge is a hinge. And for cyclists and triathletes, there's no reason for you to deadlift off the ground. Absolutely none. You get all the gains, you get all the benefits, and way lower risk by putting it up off of blocks into a position that you're able to move through the hips while keeping stiffness in through the spine as you move.
No matter how strong you are, deadlifts start at 135 pounds, which is roughly equivalent to 0 pounds. Anything less is like running a 5K. It doesn't count, and neither do you. Hanging against the floor. Now, does this mean you should be slamming around 135 like you're working on the railroad? I've been working on the railroad all the day. No.
So let's get into our number 1 top consideration, and that is we have to teach you how to move from the hips. Now, some great ways to be able to learn this, as mentioned, are the hip airplane as well as the bird dog exercise. Now, these 2 exercises are actually teaching you how to get stiffness where you need it and movement in enough amounts right where you need it. So proximal stiffness to get distal motion. We're teaching you to lock the rib cage and pelvis together and get movement only from the shoulder or the hip. The shoulder and hip in the bird dog variation, the full variation, or the hip when we come to the hip airplane. Yet many of us as cyclists will have a problem, and this is coming from number 2. Because we've been riding this thing so much, we have created a lack of stiffness in through some of the spinal segments. Now, this is from Dynamic Disc Designs. This is an absolutely world-class spine model that I use to educate some of my McGill patients as a McGill certified practitioner. Now, what you'll notice here is the L5S1 disc is actually nice and stiff. There is absolutely no movement here. I'm pushing hard, or there's a very tiny bit of movement. Now, the L4, L5 disc, which is here, actually has lost some of its his stiffness. It's not as gristled. Now, how does that happen? It comes from being on the bike, not moving through the hips as well, and rounding our back to get into a more aero position. And what this does is it creates a bit of what's called a spiny hinge. This is where when we're deadlifting, we'll round our back a little bit, and then at the top, we'll actually actually create a hinge here as opposed to finishing by pushing the hips forward. Now, this is a result of many hours and many repetitions with poor movement. Those tissues are becoming stretched because they're being placed in a position that they're not designed for, so they're doing what is being asked of them. They are stretching. Now, the challenge with this is it takes time and carefully learning how to protect that lower back by using your natural corset or all the muscles between your neck, elbows, and knees to create stiffness so that you're not getting the movement from the spine, either by pedaling side to side, and you can see here that moves side to side. The one below does not, as much as I twist it. So instead of moving through here and up and down and flexing, we are learning how to move from the hips. Now, there's a lot of different considerations which go well beyond a 5 to 7 minute YouTube video, but that includes what I have, and that is I was in such a rounded forward position, or maybe it happened naturally. My hips just don't move like that. It doesn't work. Thanks to my Celtic background. So we're through Ireland, my family lineage. There's a Castle Brodie in the middle of Ireland. And the Celtic hip tends to be much deeper versus the Eastern hip. And this is where you get the great weightlifting or Olympic weightlifting. The Bulgarians, I can't think of the other one off the top of my head, but these Eastern countries where they can get all the way down into these Olympic movements and really move heavy weights, it's because they have a more open hip socket versus the Celts. We're good at carrying stuff for long periods of time and marching, essentially. That's why the Celtic games look very different than a powerlifting meet, is because it's matching. Essentially, they developed these games by matching what they were able to do well. So this is really important, is we need to teach you how to, one, move through the hip as opposed through the spine, and two, teach you how to use the midsection and all of the muscles of your core. Again, the core is everything between the neck, elbows, and knees to be able to create stiffness so you're getting movement from the hip or shoulder, not from the spine. Now, really important, up here I link to a playlist for the McGill Big 3 exercises. These 3 exercises tend to be butchered by well-intended people. And I've done it myself with the McGill Crunch way back when I learned it almost 20 years ago. I didn't understand it. I read it in a book, and then I got Dr. McGill's DVD, if you guys remember those things, and I watched him demonstrate it, and I was like, wow, that is not even close to what I'm doing. So these 3 videos up here are correct. For the bird dog, you'll notice there's absolutely zero movement in through the spine. It's all through the hip and shoulder, teaching you how to stay nice and solid in through. There's also no swaying side to side. And the side planks are with the top foot forward, which is going to allow you to get better overall coordination and strength through all of the muscles between your neck, elbows, and knees. Now, when you do these exercises properly, you're sweating bullets. They are very, very difficult. You can't just blow through the reps. I've seen and worked with professional athletes at the top level, National Football League, NFL linemen and wide receivers in the U.S., NBA basketball players, collegiate basketball players, top of the world, track cyclists, as well as top road cyclists. And they are really struggling and sweating when we are doing it properly. It's really difficult to do. So taking the time to move well and with intention. And the third and final step of this process is getting the tissue adaptations. And this takes time. So if you're going to move towards lifting heavy weight, there is a time and a place, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, way back then, it's anywhere from 8 to 16 weeks, or really 10 to 16 weeks. That is how long it takes your tendons, your ligaments, and your bones to begin to really adapt to the stresses you're placing on it and the things that you need it to do that are so different than what you have over on the bike over here. That change in through these tissues is absolutely fundamental in protecting you from injury, allowing you to get the adaptations you want. I know a lot of 40 plus cyclists, strength training after 50 is my big strength training system, because so many cyclists after 50 were coming to me and asking for a year-round strength training program because there's nothing out there. It's all 8 weeks or 12 weeks, maybe 16, and then it stops. How do I do strength training year-round? And time again, they come back from the max effort. They always email me, say, I'm really nervous about doing this. I understand it's part of the system. How do I continue with this? And the answer is you just keep going with it. You adapt the energy you're putting in. And when they get it, it is absolutely amazing. It is fantastic because you feel your body working together. You feel everything working. You're getting max strength efforts in the gym, 1 day a week, maybe 2 if you have the training energy and the recoverability. And the sessions are very short. They're about 30 to 45 minutes, warm up the cool down. And they're very pointed. And you're doing this right when your cycling is really going up. And it is incredible to watch how quickly people adapt and how good they feel.
It's good. It's good. It's good.
Because they took the 2 to 4 weeks for anatomical adaptation to unwind some of these imbalances we have, the tight muscles on the front, the stretched muscles on the back, the tissues for the spine, the tissues on the backside that have been stretched are getting a chance to kind of get that tension off. Often with the bike, what I'll have people do is raise their differential so they won't be as aggressive in the front end. They come up just a little bit. We get things to kind of reset. We work on their breathing patterns. And once you get those tissues to adapt, you can then go back in and take out of that bank that you've built up. That's how you build top performance. But all three of these things, learning to move from the hips, learning how to use your midsection, your core, everything between your neck, elbows, and knees to protect that spine. And the third thing of adding just a little bit of load to get you ready to be able to move later on. These are the things that you really need to consider as you go through. So thank you so much for watching the end of the video. I know this is a longer one, but these are not small snippets. I can't teach this in 30 seconds. There's a lot of nuance to it and a lot of things that you need to know. So if you found this video to be useful and interesting, please hit the subscribe button down below. You can pick up my book, Strength Training for Cycling Performance, on Amazon for Kindle or paperback. And until next time, remember, train smarter, not harder, because it is all about you.